All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Court Matters. In today's episode, Wendy Ledger from Cayman News Service and myself, Sandy Hill from CMR, are going to be doing a bit of a recap and analysis of the annual formal ceremonial opening of the Grand Court of the Cayman Islands. And this happens every single year in January. And it's where the Chief Justice formally declares the Grand Court open for the year. After a motion is moved by the Attorney General and seconded by the Director of Public Prosecutions. And the event really just brings together representatives from all three branches of government, including the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, along with legal professionals, law enforcement, dignitaries, and the public, of course, is always invited, including the press. And so, this is a wonderful opportunity for people to get a bit of an idea of what has transpired within the judiciary for the past year and what plans and aspirations and goals they have for the upcoming year, as well as beyond that as well, sort of future planning. So, Wendy, thank you so much for joining me, co-host extraordinaire.
Hi, Sandra. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing really, really well.
Good. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about what your takeaway, like what you think was the overarching theme for this year's event.
Yeah, it's always an interesting way on that sort of particular event, because it's a bit of a talking shop. I mean, effectively, as you said, the Attorney General makes a speech, the DPP makes a speech. The guys from the Bar Association, so I think it's now the Cayman Islands Legal Practitioners Association, and then, of course, the editor of the law reports, they all make a speech, and then the final speech is delivered by the Chief Justice. And as you say, it sort of gives a look back at what's happened and an idea of what's coming forward. And I think this year, there was an awful lot of talk about the digitalization of the courts, which I know you and I are going to look at in much more detail in another program at some point.
Yes.
But they did talk a lot about that, but it's not quite finished yet. So part of the problem was that as they're transferring onto this new digital platform at the courts, because the old GEM system kind of collapsed and they can't even get the IT support for that anymore. So they had to roll out a new one. And I think it's taken a lot longer than they thought.
Yes.
They weren't able to get the kind of facts and figures that we often get, but there were some general overviews about the increasing caseload in the courts, which is obviously down to the fact that there's more people here. End of story. More people, more strangers, more crime. And also there is an element of the police budget is increasing by a lot year on year over the last 5 years. And their detection rate, as they tell us as you know, from the press briefings you've been as well, their detection rate is getting quite high, which means that they're now filing a lot of people through the courts, which does put pressure on them to dispose of the cases. And one of the things that stuck out to me today, it wasn't today, it was yesterday, the court opened. One of the things that stuck out to me was the Chief Justice's view about the support services that the court needs, because as she pointed out, they've now reached a point where they have the court space. There's been all this renovation going on. They've also got the old bank that's been converted into new courts.
Right.
There's more space and improvements have been made to the existing older buildings. So they have more space. They have more judges. Like there's an increasing number of criminal judges available, but now the problem is all of those support services that help them reach the point. And one of the things two things that she raised, one was there aren't enough criminal legal defense attorneys, which is absolutely right. That's been a problem for ages, and that can delay trials significantly. And the other thing is all the people that are involved in the process, particularly after an offender's been convicted. So from those pre-sentencing reports, psychiatric reports can be done at any time, which is also things like fitness to plea even.
Right.
So, a psychiatrist needs to do those reports. And then on top of that, there's like the expert reports that come into play when there's DNA, when there's gunshot residue to be tested, when there's accident reconstruction reports that take place in careless and dangerous driving cases. And those can take ages. So what she was talking about was there's been about year on year since 2020, there's been an accumulative increase of about 40% in the actual cases coming through the courts. That's like the Grand Court. So, and the Grand Court only deals with maybe 150 or 160 cases a year, whereas the Summary Court is dealing with literally thousands. And although they're supposed to be summary, they're supposed to be less serious cases, it still deals with a lot of serious cases because it deals with all of the drug importation, most of the cases of smuggling and the ganja boats and all that. Most of them are dealt with in the Summary Court. Some make it to Grand Court because of certain circumstances, especially if there's a gun involved or things like that. But what she was pointing out is that there's just a huge array of services that we're not making the requisite investments in to match the amount of cases that are coming through. And that really stuck out to me.
When you mentioned about the changeover in the system, now I've heard a number of lawyers complain even about that. So I think there's a lot of growing pains that come with, obviously growth. And I've been really impressed that since this particular Chief Justice has been at the helm, that she has really tried to focus a lot of her time, quite frankly, on, just trying to modernize the system and streamline it as much as possible. And, we've sat in court and we've seen the frustrations from probably both sides of the aisle, prosecution as well as defense, where they have been waiting on these reports. And a lot of times there's an unbelievable delay that occurs because the reports are simply not ready. People can't get an appointment. Sometimes it's even like treatment, like they need to go in and have their sessions, their counseling sessions, domestic violence. They do counseling sessions, mandatory counseling. So it's something that, do we think the government is paying attention? Because really it's going to come down to funding. Exactly
that. I think you're right. The government isn't paying attention because they're not really thinking about it. One of the problems that like their target, say, is if you're on remand, then the target is to dispose of your case within 6 months. That means from the minute you arrive in Grand Court to the minute that you get your sentence should not be much more than 6 months. And one of the reasons for that is because it's very different to be a prisoner on remand and a prisoner who's been sentenced. Because on remand, you can't access any of the prison programs. So you can't go to work, you can't get on an anger management course, you can't do any studying, you can't do it. Basically, you're just sitting around waiting because you can't be treated like a prisoner because when you're on remand, in theory, you're not convicted. But then there is this terrible kind of limbo place that people who have been convicted and who are awaiting sentencing sit because they still remain on remand, even though theoretically they're convicted. They don't get their sentence management plan until after they've got their sentence. So it leaves them in this sort of limbo where they're still effectively, although they're now a serving prisoner, they're effectively being treated in the same way as a remand prisoner is. So their time is idle. They're not able to work. They're not, which I know it sounds like, well, why would you want to work? But, people in prison, it's kind of like, it's what makes the time go by, right? Doing these courses, doing rehab, going to school, going to work, it helps the time tick and it helps inmates, maybe make a better go of it when they get outside again. So it is very important. And there are lots of different elements to it because we've got to be realistic. We're a very small jurisdiction and we have a very small number of specialists that can do these things. There are 2 guys in this jurisdiction that do accident reconstruction reports, 2. And how many smashes and crashes and bashes and people are killed on with anywhere between 8 and 16 people being killed on the road every year. And many of those, the fault of another driver. The fact that there's only 2 accident reconstruction experts that are also needed for the less serious cases as well, it goes to show what the problem is. We don't have a gunshot residue expert. All of the gunshot residue tests go to America. Now, obviously we have a DNA lab here, but we don't do everything at that lab. And a lot of stuff is also sent overseas. But what's perhaps the worst is the psych problems and the social workers. So the Department of Community and Rehabilitation has a limited number of social workers that work with prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
And they are the ones that do these pre-sentencing reports. So not only do they interview the victim in the case and get a victim impact report, they're also involved in the interviewing of inmates, the offenders pre to sentencing, to get an idea of what their circumstances are, what mitigating or aggravating factors there are in a sentence. Mm-hmm. And those reports play a very significant part in the judge's decision about how long someone goes to jail for,
Absolutely.
or if they go at all.
Yep.
So
no, I mean, for sure, we've seen it.
And we're not getting the investment on these guys isn't there. As you know, a psych report can take years sometimes. We've had situations where we've got certain people in the courts from fitness to plea reports all the way through to whether they can stand trial. And even after, if they have and they've been convicted, it plays a part in what you do for them afterwards. Because, obviously, we all know that HMP Northwood is woefully inadequate when it comes to dealing with inmates that have mental health challenges. Really, and we have some seriously mentally health challenged inmates in the prison that are not receiving the kind of treatment that they should or would if they were in a bigger jurisdiction, simply because of how small we are. And we don't have any institution for the criminally insane. So, and we've had some people who did some terrible things because they are criminally insane. And we put them in jail because we don't have anywhere else to put them. So they're never going to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
it's so that in itself is a problem. But just getting people into where they need to be and getting an understanding of what their circumstances are is taking ever such a long time. And it really does affect, it doesn't just affect the backlog, causing, a certain amount of backlog in the courts and slowing things down. It affects these individual offenders quite dramatically.
Yeah, it's pretty, again, I think that the idea here is to give the community an insight into what transpired during the Grand Court opening, where the areas of concern are, because I think the average person just doesn't know. Like, if you don't have to go to court, they don't, you don't go to court, you don't, probably think to yourself, well, I don't care very much as long as I don't get summons for jury duty.
But you just never know when it's going to happen. Well, you've just hit the nail on the head, because the people do get summoned to jury duty and they do get involved then in the criminal justice system. They begin to see what the problems are, and that in itself has had. She also mentioned that in passing. I mean, as well as discussing, offering her thanks and explaining the incredible importance of jurors and their contribution. But she also pointed out, that the jury pool is nowhere near as big as the courts would like it to be now, given the amount of cases, because we do have a lot of problems. How many times have you been there when people are rejected because they know everybody that's involved in the case, be it the offender, the lawyers?
I'm having this issue right now where, choosing
a jury for you, it's nigh on impossible.
Yep. It's already been postponed several times until they can have a full slate of jurors, because we just haven't
been able to fresh from the first, a brand new batch. I mean, obviously, as the years have gone on and more paper Caymanians, if you like, have gone on to the voter list and then on to do jury duty, you have a little bit less than it used to be, with people knowing absolutely everybody involved. But I mean, I've seen cases where they literally had to go and run onto the streets to get jurors because of the fact there was one multi-handed gun case. I think it was maybe 15 years ago now, maybe not as much as that, I don't know, around about that time, that was in West Bay, and it was where a whole selection of guns had been found in an attic in West Bay in a house, and getting a jury for those 4 guys, because they were all well-known people from West Bay that were accused. They all got acquitted in the end, if I remember rightly, but all of them were well-known people. Getting a jury it took days and days. And Chief Justice Ramsey Hale raised the spectre, which will not be welcome, of expanding the jury pool to beyond registered voters, and came out, I mean, obviously hinting at beyond, because it is The jury pool is open to all Caymanians. The fact that they use the voters list as one of the ways to access them, you don't actually have to be on the voters list to be called for jury duty. So if they get access to your information and you get put on the court docket, even if you're not a registered voter, you can still be called for jury duty. So anybody who thinks that they're not on if they're not on the voters roll, you can still get called. It's not because all that's happened is that over the years they found that that's perhaps one of the easiest ways to get people, but they have other means as well of finding, Caymanians. And it doesn't mean to say that just because you're not registered to vote, if you're a Caymanian, you can still get called for jury duty. But she was actually talking, I feel, although it's ambiguous, I can't say for certain, but I think she was hinting at pushing that jury pool wider, and there has been in the past consideration given to
people with PR
who are naturalized or that kind of thing, is to add to that pool, because it is quite small and it is difficult to get a mixed jury, at least, because you do, and that's the thing, you deserve to be tried by a jury of your peers, and you've got to bear in mind how many people that come to this jurisdiction they end up in criminality, but they're not originally from here, and so they're not being tried by their peers. Do you know what I mean? I suppose in theory they are, because it's still resonance, but I think, it's like Caymanians want to be tried by Caymanians, and that's the problem. So you have a situation where if we start recruiting a lot of people into jury pools that are not Caymanian yet, there's going to be a backlash, I think, from Caymanians saying, well, there was half the people on that jury were not even Caymanian. I mean, it's one thing to be a paper Caymanian, and that's acceptable, but it's another to be not even Caymanian, and maybe never becoming Caymanian and getting on the jury. So I don't know how that will roll, but it is definitely one of the issues that keeps cropping up year on year in regards to the resources for the court, because the court demands a lot of resources. It's a separate, although it's completely independent of government, it's not an arm of government, it's like a branch or a branch of government, I should say. I suppose it's more of an arm, but it's part of the tripartite, if you like, of governance, which is, the executive, as in the civil service, the parliament, and then the judiciary. So the three things act independently of each other. And I mean, that's why it's that grand court opening is the only time they all sit in the same room. So you have civil servants, politicians and judges and lawyers all sitting in the same room. It doesn't happen very often.
Yep. No, it's certainly a good opportunity for them to perhaps have a bit of a learning experience. And additional information. Now, was there anything that stood out in your mind from any of the guest speakers? So we know, for example, it's not just the Chief Justice that speaks. You've got the DPP that will get up and make some remarks. The Attorney General did as well. Was there anything else that they sort of mentioned that was notable?
I would say perhaps they tend to be like the Attorney General didn't have quite so much to say this year, because his speeches has been for the last, 400 years, it feels. It has always been about the legal practitioners law that was never passed. And he usually talks about legislation and stuff that's going to be coming up, but it didn't so much this year. His was more of welcome everybody, and here's the stuff. But and because the legal practitioners bill is now passed, he talked a little bit about that and sort of recapped how that's working out, and various other bodies and things. But what was interesting was, because I think it's the longest I've ever heard him speak in a courtroom since he got here, the Director of Public Prosecutions actually delivered his own address this year. And it was quite long. And it was the first time I'd heard him speak. I was, quite, whoa, he can actually stand up and talk. And because he's never tried a case since he got here, so I assumed that he had some speech impediment or something, but no, he was quite an articulate speaker, and was all went quite well. And one of the things that he was heavily focused on in his speech, and I'll probably be doing a report about this later because the Chief Justice also spoke about it, but is not just about the new systems that they've implemented in the courts and all this electronic filing, but a much broader digitalization of everything. So from going forward, they want all of those bundles, and like the bundles that you get when Cassandra,
Oh yeah.
as an expert on being prosecuted.
Yep. Absolutely.
How the bundles can stretch to all sorts of huge paper, like quantity, that they want to digitalize it and start using iPads. And there's going to be more computers for jurors. So the jurors, I mean, it's already started. I think you've seen some trials where the jurors are given an awful lot more on computer now rather than, but they still get a lot of paperwork and a lot of bundles. And it is quite challenging when there's everything from, the telephone evidence, or if it's when they're white collar crimes and fraud cases, and you have all these huge reams of documentation, it is very challenging for jurors. And I think having that all on an iPad, I think will make their lives a lot easier. And so Simon Davis the DPP spoke a lot about how they are now moving towards paperless prosecutions. So, I mean, obviously, there are certain things like indictments and stuff will still be on paper. But I think, all of these evidence bundles and all the photographs. I mean, yourself, sometimes there are crime scene photo albums that are like this thick, they're like tombs. And I think moving towards a digital platform is a great idea. I mean, it'll cut costs if nothing else. I mean, God knows how much they must spend on photocopying ink. Photocopying ink is very expensive. So that in itself will save some money, maybe for some social workers that can actually help with the speeding along the sentencing for people. So there was a lot that came out about the prioritizing of resources and how those resources are used wisely. Because there's still a lot of issues about funding for legal aid, which we've already spoken about quite a bit. Now this funding for external resources, because people just don't think about exactly how many people are involved in just one criminal case. If you've got, say, a robbery of two guys that are accused of robbery, the amount of external support services other than the lawyers and the judges involved in those cases is quite significant now.
No, I mean, absolutely. And that's really the idea, I think, behind even this program, is to try to demystify a lot of what happened so that people understand. So there was a lot of talk about, I feel like the word of the proceedings was this sustainability. Both the Chief Justice and the DPP's office use this language of sustainability, not just as it relates to punishment, but whether the justice model can be sustained without more of the resources that you're talking about, police, prosecution, defense, courts, legal aid. It all works in tandem. And so this lack of capacity, lack of resources across the entire criminal justice, all the criminal justice agencies, really threatens future sustainability of the system if it isn't addressed. I think, again, the legislature, who is responsible for funding these things, have to pay close attention to what this means. Can we talk about some of the numbers? Because we saw summary court cases growing at 88% increase in criminal case files and a 44% increase in traffic summons.
I'm not sure about I thought it was 80%, but she did make it clear that the statistics this year are not accurate because they couldn't pull them down because that's part of the problem. The GEMS, they've transferred from what they used to call the GEMS system, which is now like obsolete. They had no choice. They had to replace it. And that replacement is not finished yet. I mean, basically, although they've now reopened the criminal registry, it's been put back where it was. And they're now working on getting this new system up and running. But there are, as you pointed out, a lot of teething problems in it. And that was why the Chief Justice said that her and Justice Cheryl Richardson, I think, other members of the court management, took some time this year to look at these issues about remand. And they looked at the Grand Court only, and there were 38 people as of last week, basically. So at the start of the year, there were 38 offenders. This is just HMP Northwood, and from the Grand Court, there were 38 offenders on remand. And of those, 12 had gone well over the 6 months. And of those, it was all about sentencing problems that were down to reports. And so that was where they were, where she started talking about how they'd taken a close look, because you've got to add to that. It's not just those 38 people on remand from HMP, from the Grand Court, just to the men's prison. There's women as well, but also, like you said, all the stuff in the summary court, and the summary court is out of control. We don't know the exact figure, but it could be as much as 80% that it went up this year. And I mean, obviously, there was a bit of a decline during COVID and everything, so it's gradually coming back up again. So, like, I think the benchmark figure that she was using was 2020, or it might have been 2019, prior to COVID or whatever. But anyway, the figures are a little shaky. However, what is clear is that you're talking about, they're dealing with over 2,000 cases a year, just criminal, in summary court. And then on top of that, you got all the traffic stuff. Now, what she did say, which was interesting, is that it's already started now, but they've been wanting for quite some time to move justices of the peace that are actually qualified lawyers, not the ones that just sign random warrants for no reason, but well-trained and qualified justice of the peace, to sit on a special traffic ticket court. So not people who are caught doing pretty bad things like DUIs or mowing someone down, not that kind of traffic, but just literally speeding, using your mobile phone, or going the wrong way around a roundabout or whatever, where people want to dispute that ticket. So that's a less of a, it's not, because it's not an offence, right? Those are just simply ticketable situations that a magistrate and a lay magistrate, as justice of the peace are known when they're in that kind of capacity, a lay magistrate can sort out, because either the ticket's valid or it isn't. So they make a decision about did that person speed or didn't they, and it's that kind of thing.
Now, I know that she, and I wonder if this was covered, you have to tell me, there was a discussion some time ago about having these lay magistrates. A lot of them are the JPs.
That's what they're using.
Yeah, they've gotten some training, but when I spoke to them, it was like, okay, they did some training and then they kind of didn't hear anything further. So is that not yet in place at all? It's just that they've done
She said, because this is what I was surprised about. She said that the traffic ticket court, with a small number of qualified justices of the peace, have had training and have begun doing just tickets. So it's nothing serious. They're not going to be asked to make judgments on people that are drunk drivers, or on people that have hurt people on the road, or anything like that. It is purely people who are disputing straightforward tickets. So speeding, mobile phone, seatbelt, mostly. And that is a lot. I mean, I don't know, 7,000 crashes a year or so. I don't know how many. No, 3,000 crashes a year or whatever, isn't it? And then God knows, it's something like 7,000 tickets are issued a year by police, something like that. Yeah. For those administrative offences. Right. So, and if everybody disputes those, then you get these backlogs, and so. I think that personally, I think it's a pretty sensible move to take that option and to say, well, it's common sense. Somebody's come in, they've either got a straightforward response to the ticket. Listen, I wasn't speeding. He got the police officer was using his radar wrong and he got the car behind me, or whatever. And if you can prove that in some way, or you can show you weren't using your mobile phone, or whatever, or you can't, and then the ticket is valid. So it's not a challenging, and the idea that you can dispute a ticket in any event, it's kind of, there's not many places now in this day and age that if a cop issues you a traffic ticket that you can dispute it, because in most cases, in most other jurisdictions now, these are digitally recorded, so they can prove without any shadow of a doubt that you were speeding, or that you weren't wearing a seatbelt, or you were using a phone. So it is getting, in other jurisdictions, it's getting harder and harder to challenge a ticket. And so you have to jump through a lot more hoops to challenge a ticket in other jurisdictions than you do here. But also what a lot of other jurisdictions have that we don't, and the UK has certainly been doing this for decades, and it really helps with the amount of people that pay their ticket, is if you pay your ticket within 14 days of getting it, you get a 50% discount. It's a really good idea. Which
that's a great idea.
I think that would assist traffic court enormously with this huge amount of cases that they have that's challenging to get through. And then you can leave like the magistrates, the more senior staff, to deal with those more serious cases where people are really drunk or where they run someone over.
Right. And has there been any, I mean, I want your thoughts on this. What do you think about tapping into, again, at the summary court level, tapping into attorneys who may not be working as defense attorneys at court, but still have the requisite knowledge to handle, certain types of, assault cases, sort of outside of the regular jobs, if you will? Is there any thought of expanding to help with some of the, to help with some of the overflow, if you will?
It's interesting you bring it up, actually, because that was another thing that she talked about, was how she spoke about, and it's quite a long time ago now, that some of the leading offshore law firms, as part of their giving back to the community thing, used to have little tiny criminal departments in, like Walker's had it, I believe Maples did too, I think Appleby definitely did.
Yeah, I don't think Maples ever did, actually, but I know for sure.
Not? I don't know. I know Walker's definitely did, because I think Prathner, who is, we both know, Prathner Bodden is a very, very well-known and now senior defense attorney. She came up through the Walker's tiny little legal aid office. I think there was like two of them, her and one of the lawyer, I think, at the time when I first came. And they would do pro bono work, basically. Well, they get legal aid for it, but they considered it pro bono because obviously legal aid pays, even today, it still only pays it's less than $200 an hour. Whereas I'm sure Walker's attorneys are charging more like $200 every 10 minutes. So, to them, it was pro bono, But what she was saying when she spoke about that was how helpful it was, because not only did it, did those lawyers that worked in those departments go on to form their own companies and become bigger firms for legal aid. It helps, adds to the community. And she was saying that we desperately need more defense attorneys, and she would like to see some of the big firms introduce those little offices again. I mean, it doesn't have to be a lot, but just 1, 2, 3 little lawyers doing the legal defense work, being on legal aid, which will help. And she also kind of appealed to the likes of Prathner, that is a partner in a law firm now, and others, like obviously there's some well-known defense attorneys that we all know, but it is very limited still. It's only a handful of firms that are doing it day in, day out, and ask them to recruit more lawyers for legal aid work, because there is so much work there, and that the lack of attorneys is another thing, if you like, in that sort of support service thing to the court, that the court has no control over, because the court is vested with this or is required under best practice to complete, justice delayed, justice denied, all that, so to complete cases at the absolute worst within a year. And if they can't control the elements that are causing the delay, then you can't blame the courts, right? You can't blame Chief Justice. She does seem to be running, like you say, I think she's running a fairly smooth ship. And I think, she's doing everything she possibly can to address all of these problems that have been there since, systemic problems that have existed for decades, that she's looking at and taking seriously and trying to get things moving along. And I mean, obviously, as you said, there are as more change there is, the more teething trouble there's going to be. And it's going to be a while before this all irons itself out. But I think, her point was well made. And I don't know. The problem was, by the time we got to the Chief Justice's speech, this is rather funny. By the time we got to the Chief Justice's speech, all of the MPs virtually had left, because they were either going to a public accounts committee pre-meeting, which took place today, and they had their pre-meeting yesterday, or they were going to a cabinet meeting. So by the time, because she came last, and like I say, Simon Davis's speech was quite long actually, and then you've got 3 other speakers as well, and then she tends to respond to them, because you know she's really like chatty and funny, and she's always very engaging with people. So after every speech, she spoke and responded to some of the things that they'd raised and stuff. So by the time we got to her, they'd all gone. So as she's making these sort of pleas for, you've got, as a legislator, we've got to prioritize where we put our resources, and that if we can somehow shift resources around so that we get more support services, we can speed up justice and make meet the constitutional requirements of judicial fairness and equity, and make sure people get a fair shot at court in a reasonable time. Because it is, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been on remands, Sandra, for any period of time during your multiple arrests. No, I myself have been fortunate enough never to have to sit in a jail cell in this jurisdiction. I'm not denying that I haven't sat them in others during a long and checkered history, but I have certainly never sat in the detention center here in a cell. And I can imagine if you're not familiar with the criminal justice system and you're arrested and you're held on remand for a serious crime, or because you're a lot of people here are considered a flight risk, because they're not from this jurisdiction, or they don't have, and they're held in a jail. It's horrible, even if it's just a night. I mean, it's horrible. So we really have to try and make, especially for people who haven't been convicted yet, we need to, if you're convicted, then you're convicted, and therein lies the punishment, and that's what it is. But if you're an innocent person and you're being held on remand, that cannot possibly be a good place to be in. And I think she's right. I think I was quite impressed by, and her delivery is, I mean, God, we're blowing smoke up her ass here, but her delivery is always kind. Do you understand what I mean? It never sounds like she's being mean about the government, or she's just, as she said, these things need to be stated plainly. It's not criticism. It's just that this is a situation that we find ourselves in, and we must recognize it in order to do something about it. And so obviously in the end, the money comes from, whilst the judiciary is completely independent, its money comes from central government. And it means that whilst they're investing in the courts and we're making all this investment in improving detection rates, and enforcement might be getting better, at the other side of it, we're not adding to all of the services that come with that, which includes particularly probation and the amount of people that we need in probation. I don't think we have anywhere near enough.
Wow. Well, that sounds like it was really, I'm kind of wondering though, based on your comment, do you think maybe she should do the procedure? Maybe she should start to go first and allow the others to follow her? I mean, I know that you said she likes to respond to them, but for the sake of ensuring,
I mean, I think it's more a case of government branches talking to each other, because I think if they'd have realized that, I mean, they generally always do it on a Wednesday. I don't know why, and they generally do it on the second Wednesday in January. So if both the government, the MPs or the politicians and the judiciary have both known what the dates were going to be, then people might jug things around. There might come, some kind of an agreement, because I think it's important that they do listen to her, because it is the only time that she gets to say, hey, people from government, here are our issues. We understand that it's not necessarily your fault, but what can you do to help us? Because if you want us to get better, we're doing everything we can in our end, but there are all these things, these variables that we cannot control, and that they need investment. And however you want to go about it, but these are my problems. And it is very rare that she gets an opportunity to do that. And I think it was a bit of a shame that they kind of got up and left. But circumstances are such, cabinet has to go on, like governor won't be kept waiting or whatever, and public accounts committee needed to meet. So It is what it is. And, you know, I mean, some of the speech, you know, it's like a lot of, you know, I don't know what the Attorney General said, that it was so, you know, so that it needed to be so long. And I mean, I don't know why Simon Davis chose to give such a long speech, because I think last year somebody else delivered it for him and it was very short. And then actually Richard Barton didn't say too much about, and I think there wasn't too much to say about the legal practitioners law, because although they've talked about that for years and years and years and years and years, it's kind of new, and it's still not, you know, there's still issues that they're working their way through, and all of these support bodies and everything, these are all still being worked through. So I think there were elements that were missing from this year's speeches because of these digital issues, that she couldn't get the stats. And then there was the issue of like, well, the legal practitioners law's not really been in effect long enough yet for us to really have a handle on how it's going. And I think they're already beginning to see that there might be some things that they want to change or whatever. So they're working through that now. But you know, making judgments about it's still too early to say, I suppose. So you know, the speeches tend to be, you know, they are what they are. Sometimes they're long, sometimes they're not. But I think, you know, by the time she got on, the politicians just upped and left. And so the people that she was really addressing in that speech weren't there to listen, which is a shame, because it was good. And I really felt, I mean, her address has stuck with me in my memory much more than the others did, although Simon Davis's, you know, long talk about the digitalization of prosecutors was, I mean, actually, there was one thing that he did that I did notice that he spoke about, which was staff turnover.
Did he actually speak about that?
Yeah, he did. And I thought he really shied away from the realities of what's been going on there. I mean, like, that's putting it kindly, because you and I know, I'm sure you're well aware of like the absolute, I mean, mass exodus effectively of great attorneys. For like, I mean, I don't know a lot of the people that have come. There's been a huge influx from people from the UK that have come recently, I would say in the last 6 months to a year, that I'm not familiar with yet. I haven't seen as many of them practice yet or prosecute. Some appear great, but people that we know that were really good that have left, like, you know, Candida, Greg Malcolm.
Most of the Caribbean staff, basically. Yeah,
most of the Caribbean stuff, and they are now a cohort of, there's hardly any, I don't think there's a single local prosecutor now, and all of the Caribbean and Caymanian lawyers left, and they've gone into private practice, and they're on, you know, they're now defending, and you know, quality prosecutors in defense are pretty good. So these new guys are going to be up against the people that they're now in their jobs, and they're going to know way more than they are. So it's, you know, like from their jurisdictional knowledge to their knowledge of cases, I mean, and how prosecutions work, you know. So these new guys that have all come from the UK, I mean, there's women as well, men and women that have come from the UK, you know, they're going to have some hard work ahead of them, you know. Cultural understanding for lawyers is extremely important, and because especially when they're jury trials and you're talking to a collection of local jurors, you need some local cultural knowledge, and they have lost that now from the DPP. And he did not seem to see that it had anything to do with him.
Really?
Completely seemed blind to it. And was all about, oh, we're doing better succession planning, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And you know, I'm going to drill down and look at his speech a lot more, because my priority yesterday was to obviously prioritize the Chief Justice because of the demands on budget, which is significantly, you know, from a news perspective, that those are, you know, where's the money coming from? That's always a lot more important. But you know, sometimes the other stuff. And so I will be taking a look at what he said. But I think, you know, whilst he's now saying, yeah, you know, we're putting all these things in train, it's a little bit too late, a little what do they say?
A little
not enough,
too,
a little too late.
Yeah.
Come in.
I forget what the saying is, but yes.
Yeah, I forget what the saying is.
I shouldn't be surprised, to be honest, that he is tone deaf to what is happening in his own department, because the truth of the matter is
very, very unaware.
Yeah. And the truth of the matter is it has more to do with him running the department than anything else. So it wouldn't surprise 100%. Me that either he is, purposely tone deaf, or, I can't imagine that he's just that clueless.
Well, it's hard to get a handle on who he is, given that he has no presence in the courts. He doesn't. That's what I'm saying. I was like absolutely shocked. At first, I was like, I don't even know who this is, because first and foremost, he was wearing a wig for the first time, because he's never been in court litigating where he actually needs to wear a wig. And he in the full thing and standing upright and speaking out, I just didn't recognize him. It was just, and then I was like, oh yeah, it is him. Like he'd turn a certain way, and I'd be like, oh yeah, that's him. But he was articulate. He spoke really well. His speech was interesting. It wasn't all the usual sort of like, oh, everybody's lovely and Chief Justice, we adore you, and all that stuff, which goes on. There's a lot of that, groveling, for want of a better description, goes on in these things. How everybody's like, ridiculously over the top, polite, and can't, rushing to tell everybody else how fabulous they all are. But he actually delivered a speech that spoke a lot about what's going on in the prosecutor's office and what they do and what they're up to. And he literally, seemed to be delighted with the recruitment that's going on and everything. And I was just like, but you've just lost, in the last year, you've lost a catalogue of lawyers, and they're all gone to the other side.
Exactly.
And like your new people are, where's your institutional knowledge? You don't have any, because you don't have any.
Right.
That you've proven that to us, because we never seen it do the job. So it is a concern. Lousy prosecutors, and don't help anybody. Except the defendant. And I mean, fine if they're innocent, but if they're not, and you're allowing, convicted defendants who should have been convicted, who are guilty, to go free because your prosecution is poor, because you didn't retain the institutional knowledge that you needed, and you have ended up recruiting a whole bunch of people from another jurisdiction that just don't yet. And it takes time. I am sure, like all of them that come, they will adapt. But this like cohort of particularly British lawyers, and no regional lawyers, not even, I'm not even sure whether he's still there. I mean, obviously Kenneth Ferguson is still there, and he's been there for like 1,000 years. And I think Kenneth's not going anywhere, because he's coming up for retirement. So, he's not going to go looking for a new job right now. Like, civil, I mean, I think we could all work that one out. But I think there's only one other regional lawyer in the prosecutor's office now. All the rest are British.
Unbelievable.
Which is a bit of a, I don't know, I would say a bit of a backward step, to be honest.
Yeah, of course.
He seemed delighted. So all my staff have left, but hey, I got some friends from the UK. So I'm not sure he didn't say that, and I don't want to malign him in any way. I mean, maybe he thought his team that left was rubbish and he could do better. So I don't know. I'm not in his head. All I can say is that I have never seen the guy do the job. And I have to say, one of the things about Cheryl Richard, when she was the director of public prosecution, she was in that courtroom day in, day out.
Oh, yes.
Leading cases and teaching her juniors.
Yes.
Do you understand what I mean? Like, she was passing on her institutional knowledge to the new young people that were coming up behind her, and did a great job and prosecuted some really, really challenging cases and won them in a sort of, in a very, I mean, some people might say, Cheryl Richards was not flamboyant. You know, she wasn't like a showboater. You know, there's a lot of lawyers and litigators, especially in criminal defense, that are showboaters, and they, you know, they act, and they're all very, you know, you've seen this, you know, especially cases, like, you know, they're very animated, and, you know, they have lots to say. Cheryl was just
she's
methodical and practical, and step by step, slowly. None of the theatrics, but she got to where she needed to be, and she got some very, very important convictions.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Anything else that stood out as kind of critical in today's, again, you know, or happened yesterday? But
those are the main things. More defense attorneys, more money to be invested in services, utilizing different JPs in a different way, utilizing resources more effectively, you know, that kind of thing. Obviously, the digitalization, that's a big thing, because that I think will help speed things up. You know, if you're not passing around, because, you know, it's almost like in Parliament, they do the same thing. Everybody always has to have the paper document. Everything has to stop whilst everything's copied. And, like, you know, they spend hours in the court before a trial starts, like handing out bundles and giving them extra bits of paper to put in under this tab and that tab and all the rest of it. Once it's all on a laptop, you don't have to worry about any of that. And I mean, I think, you know, that's going to cause a lot of that will smooth things out. I think it will speed things up. You know, actually, I tell you what was interesting that she didn't mention, and I don't know if you remember. I think it was maybe her first Grand Court address as the Chief Justice. She mentioned the concept of localized, so taking the courts out to the districts and doing some summary court days in the district. So you do it at a so, for example, you might do it at the bottom town.
They do with Kim and Brack.
Yep. So actually taking the court to a civic center or a municipal building of some kind in the districts, and doing some of those less serious. I mean, obviously not the people that are in jail, but the less serious, like, you know, the assault, the arguments between neighbors, you know, he ripped property damage, you know, that he ripped up my fence, that, you know, the threatening harassment cases, that kind of thing, where you know, neighbor disputes or common assaults, that sort of thing, that they could do in the districts, which she was all about, to, again, you know, engage more people to have a greater understanding of what's going on in the courts. But she never mentioned it. It wasn't mentioned at all. And I thought when she started talking about introducing the justices of peace into the courts to do minor cases, that would have been an opportunity to talk about the district thing, but she never mentioned it. So I don't know. I don't know whether they've had issues with where they can do it.
Right.
Which
there has to be,
there are certain rules that you got to have.
So, around it, and
So I don't know whether that's what it was. But that was one thing I noticed from an admission. But other than that, you know, like I say, the things that we've discussed already, those were the things that jumped out at me, I think, most of all. And as I say, it was a bit of an unusual year, because we couldn't really look at how the exact increases and in what feels like what cases are increasing and what are not. And the Grand Court tends to be steady. Like, the amount of cases that go to Grand Court is around anywhere between 130 and 150 odd every year, maybe 160 at top every year. But there are thousands in the lower court, and then thousands more of traffic, and then thousands more of tickets. So it's you know, everybody always talks about it, like, you know, when the courthouse was built. When was it built, Sandra?
Oh my God!
When you were a teeny weeny little girl.
Yeah, probably. In
the 70s sometime.
Yeah, was I born yet? Yes.
37 lawyers here or something. 37. It was like 700 at least now.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. Ago. Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Any discussions in your mind as we start to wrap up about how to get people interested in becoming part of that system, as opposed to going into just corporate law? there's so many different areas.
Yeah, I know. I find it interesting that, everybody who wants to do law, once they start doing it, they all seem to drift towards commercial and, financial law.
That's where the money
and
is,
I can't think of anything. I'd rather stick pins in my eyes than do commercial law. However, I could have seen myself as a defense attorney back in the day, as a criminal defense attorney. It was definitely something I gave thought to.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a throwback moment to when I was in high school. I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer from the age of 9. I remember telling my dad this grand, I want to be a lawyer one day. And he's like, okay, good for you, pat me on the head. And so when I was in high school and I was sort of thinking, okay, university's coming up, where am I going? What am I going to do? I participated in, it might have been the inaugural teen court, because I remember going on TV and being interviewed and stuff about this teen court program. And so we got to be attorneys, right, of our peers. So whenever teenager, they could only qualify for the program. It was the first time misdemeanor offense, so obviously nothing that serious. Got in a fight at school or whatever. But we still had power, like the jury had a jury pool, and they could, minimum of 10 hours community service. If they had a driver's license, they could have the court take their driver's license away. They could give them more community service. Like there was actual stuff that they could, give them by way of like sanctions and so forth. And so I always wanted to be prosecution, because I was like, yes, they did it. Yeah, they got throw them in jail kind of attitude, right? And I remember one day they were short. They didn't have enough, it was a volunteer thing for us. And they didn't have anyone to do defense for this young teenager who'd gotten in a fight. And so they kind of said to me, oh, why don't you do it? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I'm here to put people away, not to make them walk the streets, And so I said, all right, sure. I'll give it a shot. And you actually got to sit down, talk to your client, interview them. It was like it was pretty real, as it gets for people who are not even qualified. So I put on my best, defense hat and gave it a good shot. It was actually overseen by a real legitimate judge. And it was a guy who was very, very respected in the judiciary there in Tampa, called Judge Castor. His ex-wife went on to be the president of USF, which is just, life is so ironic at times. When I was there, she became the first female president. Oh, really? University of South Florida, yeah. And I got to meet her and interview her as a student journalist. So anyway, I gave it my best shot, and she had a defense of self-defense, and I put that forward and asked her questions and made it very, very compelling. So it was a win in the sense that she got the minimum, which was just 10 community hours. So that was considered. Okay. And the great thing is, if the students fully participated in it, they got nothing recorded on their record. So it also gave them a second chance. So after I was done, the judge kind of pulled me aside and he said, listen, I think you really stepped up. You have some real advocacy skills here and you did a great job. I was really impressed. And as a result of that one day, me kind of stepping up and said, oh, okay, I'll do defense. Didn't really want to do it. But parts of it, I was like, I'm going to do it. I gave it my best shot. He became my mentor. And, we would have lunch and he would try to give me advice about, what to study in university, to get ready for law school. He was like, any school that you want to go to, any law school that you want to go to in the state of Florida, once you've got good grades in the LSAT, you've got good undergrad grades, LSAT is your pre-law test results that you have to do this examination. Yeah. He said, I'll give you a reference and you'll get in, because that's how powerful he was back in those days. And of course, I ended up moving back to Cayman, so didn't go that route in the States. But there's something to be said, and I have over the years really come to appreciate the important role of defense attorneys.
Oh, wow, yeah.
They really do. A lot of them do a really stellar job. Some are not that great, but by and large,
like anything. But I mean, it's successful when you watch a good defense attorney. It's almost entertaining. I mean, I have to say, we've been. I think we spoke about this in our legal age show, that we've been lucky here in Cayman to have some great defense attorneys come and do their thing in the courts here. And it's just great to watch, because they just how they and it's important. It's important that if somebody is genuinely not guilty, it is important that they get their day in court. And the better that the defense attorney is, if they then get prosecuted, and they get convicted, you have a greater appreciation that their defense attorney did absolutely everything they could. So this is a safe conviction. I watch with horror sometimes in cases in America where the attorneys are just hopeless. I mean, like the people, the what do they call it, public defenders? I mean, utterly hopeless. And you see, wrongful convictions in America are absolutely astronomical. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't get them from time to time here, but it's a lot less. It's rare that we get a wrongful conviction, as was the case in yours recently, with which it was it's not often. And we know we have a great court of appeal that steps in. And there's not many people sitting up in HMP Northwood that have been convicted that are actually innocent. There might be one or two at best. Whereas you're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even in the US, that are just not guilty, and yet they're there because the way the system works in America is very different. Yeah, I'm rabbiting on, and it's the end of the show, Sandra.
Already. I mean, it goes by so quickly when you get two talkers. Hello. Thank you so much, Wendy. I really appreciate.
No, I really enjoy having these little chats.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. And I think it'll give the community, again, lay people, an idea of kind of what happens at the opening. It's available on YouTube, folks, so you can go and watch it. The Cayman Judiciary now has their own social media, their own Facebook page. So go check it out, watch it. And it's a good opportunity to, learn a little bit more, because you never know. Take it from me. You never know when you're going to be in court, and that little bit of knowledge can assist you in some way. So Wendy, thank you so much. Really appreciate this.
More than happy. And, more than happy.
Some really great shows.
Until next week.
Yes, we will see
you guys all again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wendy.
See you later, Sandra.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Good night.